Welcome to episode 14 of the Mother Gaia Birthy Pod. As we near the end of the year, this is our final regular episode before next week's Christmas special. This week I'm joined by the incredible Caroline Marshal, who shares her two very different but equally positive birth stories. We cover a lot in this conversation, including how Caroline stayed positive during a lockdown birth, advice for friends and family on what to say and what not to say to someone experiencing a tough pregnancy, the challenges of having an unwell baby or facing a loss. Caroline also opens up about her accidental BBA and the emotional rollercoaster of an unexpected stay in NICU. Whether you're looking for inspiration, support, or simply the reassurance that every birthing journey is unique, this episode has something for you. So grab a cuppa, settle in, and let's dive into this heartfelt and honest conversation with Caroline.
Hi, I'm Caroline Marshal. I am a mum. I have two boys. They are 6 and 3. I had to check that because he's only just turned 6. And we live in North London with my husband. And I also run a business and it's called Upsource. I started that while pregnant with my second. So I feel like my business journey and motherhood journey have always gone hand in hand, which is why I also have a podcast called Bump to Business Owner. So we can talk about business owner journeys alongside motherhood because it does look a bit different, especially if you're weaving in maternity leave and recovery from birth and early years childhood, which I feel like I'm starting to come out of, and it feels really nice.
Yeah, I've just come out of that end myself. I think my youngest one has just turned 2 recently, and I've just managed to get that intake of breath and go, yeah, they still need me, but not 24/7.
Totally that. And then we had a bit of a hardy, I can't lie, with 3 with my second, and just tantrums and things like that. But now I'm like, he's at preschool and I'm like, oh, the little people, yeah, still need you, want hugs, want to, but that breathing space, isn't it? And I think so getting used to that after how many years of single life.
Yeah. So we are going to do about your birthing experiences.
Yeah.
So shall we start from the first one? It sounds like a very good place to start, says Mary Poppins.
A very good place to start. So it was almost 6 years ago to the day. It was an August baby. Very much an untimed pregnancy. So I did struggle quite a lot mentally and with isolation because none of my friends were doing it. I wasn't a great pregnant person. Health-wise, absolutely fine, which was the joy about it of falling pregnant naturally well. So I had a lot to be thankful for. But I really went into birth thinking I don't know why this energy I had in me, because I had like quite a medical background, but I was really like, I want to do the birth center, but I'm going to do hypnobirthing. And I had tried hypnotherapy in the past, so I think that's why I just really believed in it. So I did the Positive Birth Company, and because we couldn't actually afford and I would have loved to have done a course in person, things like that. I'm a big fan of that, but we couldn't afford it at the time. And so my friend, one of my best friends, is a midwife, and she suggested that company to me. And I also read a book, the Positive Birth book, and I was like, I'm gonna try for this. Really worked on my every day, worked on that. And also I think having a tough pregnancy, it was really gave me something to focus on getting the child out. And I was overdue, and I think when you have overdue, I know it's not they come when they come, don't they? But I think for some reason, despite the fact actually in my family, now I look back on it, I was 2 weeks late, my sister was 2 weeks late, 40 speakers, things like that, or had to be induced. And my cousin had her baby recently, like 10 days after 40. So I think we all just come quite late in our family. Like everyone was like, where's your baby, and I found it so stressful because I was like, I just wanted him to come. And so then the day he finally decided he was going to make an appearance, it was 24 hours before I was booked for an induction because I was so fed up. I thought, fine, they want to offer this. I was just the happiest birthing person I've ever met. I was delighted that my body was like saying yes to labor. So we were quite chill. I did my makeup, didn't tell anyone, WhatsApped people that morning just so people didn't start scheming that I might be in labor. I just wanted to keep it very private. I was always very much, I don't want anyone else around. I want it to be me, my husband, and the midwives. And I got to active labor quite quickly. So I was ready to push the baby at home, or got to that transition phase. But because I did that quite quickly while I was watching films, my husband had made me a nest. We'd done everything really cozy.
Yeah.
They kept trying to keep us at home. And I was like mooing, and I'd also did this thing. What I've read since is that some women, when they transition between the active labor and the pushing, they have a little nap, like a very brief one, to rev them up. And because I did that, they were like, oh, she's not in active labor, like she's not ready to come in. If she can sleep, she's not ready to come in. But that I was doing. So basically I transitioned to like pushing stage at home, and I was just, this baby was ready to come out. And it was a bit like a film, even though they say that it never happens like that. That's what happened to us. That he was like, right, I'm bringing her in. And I was driving through a town in North London and ready to push the baby out. And I even got out while the car was moving because it was taking too long to park up. And I was just, it was all his fault.
I've had enough of you. Got to just
because it was a Sunday, so there was a different entrance to the hospital that you had to use that we hadn't used before. And he ran ahead, check it was the right one. In my head, I was like, why is he doing that? Why is he leaving me on my own? Good reasons. And then we arrived, and they were like, look, in the lift, I could literally feel he was like trying to come out. I was like, something's happening. And my husband was like, let's get to the birth center. Like, it can happen then when it's not happening in the lift. And they were like, they could tell they still didn't believe me. And they listened to the heartbeat, and they were like, okay, it's dropped a bit, so either you're ready to push, or you've got to go up to the birth center at the labor ward and be monitored. And I couldn't communicate at this point, and I was just like, you'll find out. He was like, you go down and have a look, because you'll see that he's coming out. And they're like, yeah, you're ready to push, and just turned me over on my front. And I didn't even have time to take my dress off, which I was desperate to at this point. I didn't want any clothes on me, but I couldn't like communicate that. And I was just like, let's just get this baby out. So about half an hour later, he was there, arrived, and it was a really lovely birth. It was funny, it was in the birth center, and I would have liked a pool birth, but for me, it was like this weird thing. I arrived and the pool was there. I knew there was no time for it. I was just really happy it was there. And everything went well with him. It was a really positive birth. And I was so happy because I felt like, because none of my friends had kids, like quite like a hard work pregnant person, someone who didn't want to go to places, do the same things, tired, was definitely not a pregnancy unicorn. And everything that this image of pregnant people should be, that I should just be thankful that I could get pregnant as a 30-year-old woman.
Running through fields with daisies in your hair and all that.
Definitely not like that, especially when I'm like attending friends' wedding dress appointments and I feel like an elephant, and I'm meant to be getting married 4 months after the birth itself. But I felt at least I can go to my friends and go forth and say positive births can happen. And I really did enjoy it. It's so weird. Like, my husband would tell me if I had it all wrong and I was just delusional, but I was very high on the whole experience. We say, like, for ages, I think the highness of that birth experience and how it can go has made me such an advocate of like choice and supporting women, and us having that time to do the work during pregnancy. I'm not saying like things happen, which we'll learn later in my next story, but I'm really a believer in positive births and trying to get as much as you can to support that positivity, as well as education. I think it's the key differences. And if we talked about birth before women were pregnant, because I feel like we just give pregnant people too much information. And
you fall pregnant and you have like 8 months of this, and you go, I don't know what I'm doing.
Oh, and you shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be doing that. And
You're
this
not
is where
allowed to do that. Oh, I hate that one.
Where all the mothers get, you just, everything starts to feel your fault. And as women, that's a bit of a thing for us. We know that. And it becomes more of a thing when you're pregnant, and it's suddenly like, even my friends now, she's on the other end of the scale in our friendship group. She's the last to like have a baby at the minute. Like,
she sat there and watched you all and gone, I'm waiting. Thanks.
No, literally she did. But even she said, we went for a walk and she was like, I can't believe how many things I can't do, or things like that. And she would have heard all our stories, and she was a good listener in that. She wasn't someone who wouldn't listen. But it's that even for her, it's still a shock that I have so many pet peeves on that. I think it's gone. I think the medical world is beautiful. They saved my baby. They literally did. My next baby, not that one. But I think trying to control something, birth, unfortunately, and pregnancy is not something you can control. It's something you can support.
Yeah.
Try
You
and have
can
the best
be in
outcomes.
control of things that you want to happen, or your decisions and things like that.
Decisions.
Yeah. But I mean, just a funny little story that popped up there with me with the whole you're not allowed to do something. I remember during my first pregnancy, we'd had a baby shower, and I can't remember whether it was my mum or my auntie had said to me that I'm not allowed to eat the blue cheese. And I picked it up and put it in my mouth and said, I'm not allowed to do what? I'm 35 years old. If I want to eat the cheese, I'll eat the cheese.
Yeah. Honestly, I've got a friend who was on her third pregnancy, and her husband is a neonatal intensive care doctor, and actually had did some of the care for our second child when he was in NICU, and she's a doula herself, and she's like, I just refuse to believe if I have a piece of sushi, because we went for sushi, and I was like, well, it's your choice, I'm not pregnant. And she's like, I refuse to believe if I have a piece of sushi and I'm 6 months pregnant right now, that this is really impacting my child. And it's true, because the food safety standards we have in this country.
Yeah.
And I saw a doctor with my first child, and he was like, just don't go eating some obscure unpasteurized French cheese that we don't sell in supermarkets in the UK.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. I think the other one is like I've heard as well, like obviously it does depend on where in the world you are and what your food safety hygiene is, this and the other. And I remember eating a soft-boiled dippy egg, and again I think it was my mum going, you can't eat that, it's not cooked properly. I was like, it's got a lion stamped on it. I could eat it raw. It's fine. It's like,
yeah, and we're not even as bad in this country. My sister had a pregnancy in America and a birth in America, and the like, even like ham, stuff like that, like cooked meat, but like cold meats, that's it. Like it's crazy, and it's the control. I'm and I'm even more on this side now, having something that happened to my second child that was completely something that happens, but everyone wanted to find a reason for something that happened to him, and it's so damaging for a mother who is blaming themselves anyway.
Yeah.
To then be like, I read into the coffee, and I literally probably had an instant coffee per day with my second, and instant coffee caffeine is like nothing.
Yeah.
I read into my face cream that was from Boots, and it wasn't. and
that's the thing as well. It's so difficult when things do go wrong or something's not working properly, and you are literally, from the moment of, say, deciding to get pregnant, if you have problems with fertility, or it's not happening as quickly, or you have a miscarriage, or all these other things, you're constantly, even just without any outside well, what did I do wrong?
Yeah.
Why? This is quite clearly my fault
me?
because I'm the mom, so what have I done wrong? Why have I done this? How have I done that? Blah, blah, blah. And you can send yourself absolutely crazy looking for the reasons that went wrong, when sometimes actually there isn't a reason. And that can be so much harder to let go of. Then add in this person says this, and this person said, did you try that? Or did you get this? Or did you have that? Or blah, 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 blah. And it's like, actually, what you should be saying in that thing is, I'm so sorry that this has happened. What can I do to support you?
Yeah. What can I do now? And this is where women need support, because then if they don't get that processing support, they turn into the women then getting angry at women who did have positive births and trying to shut them down. And it's not their fault, it's their trauma showing up. But this is why I'm such a fan of, like, if you probably have heard of Anna Martha, but her new book, I've not read it yet, but she told me it's literally about saying that bad things will happen. Like, I had a friend who had cancer not long after what happened to our son, and I'm like, so many people are asking me, saying to me, why did this happen to him? Why don't you want to know why? And even though they don't know the conversations that happened between me and the doctors, or in depth, or not asked me, but then no one's saying to my friend, why did you get cancer? Because it's so inappropriate.
And it's so mad. I mean, it's very sort of similar. I've got a friend who she suffered with cancer and things like that, and everyone was always like, oh, but she was such an athlete, and she was always running, and she was so health conscious, and this, that, and the other. Oh my goodness, it's such a bad thing, and it's so horrible for her, and don't you feel sorry for her, and all this kind of stuff. He's like, but you're not blaming her for it though.
Yeah.
Whereas when I've suffered other bits and pieces, I've had miscarriages and what have you, and you get that outside, oh, well, what did you do wrong? Like, did you drink? Did you drink? Did you have too much coffee? Did you do this? Did you do that? Have you tried doing, even the ones that are meant nicely, like, have you tried doing X, Y, and Z? And you're thinking, do you really honestly think I haven't tried that? Like, if someone tells me to stand on my head and clap with my feet and that would make the baby come back, I'd do it. Do you know what I mean? Like, the well-meaning ones sometimes can be the worst.
Oh, and they can be the ones that come from a background where they're meant to be supporting other mothers, and they've said something completely inappropriate to you, and it sticks when that happens, and that's it. And my mom actually said something great to me. She was like, they're just trying to control their pregnancy and their thing. They're not thinking about you. And it's so true, and it actually helps. It's like they just want to know why so they can prevent it themselves. And I'm like, well, just by knowing me, tell you a little bit now what happened to my second. It's like so it was pandemic baby, and I think I found it really hard being pregnant a second time during that. I think especially I knew quite a few first time mums, and it was all like, oh well, I'm doing this for the first time during a pandemic, and I'm like, every pregnancy is different, and I'm running around after an 18-month-old and pregnant for a second time, and having to go to these appointments as well without my partner, the father of the child, and I'm just as angry about this as you, and I can't even take, you should be able to take your kids into scans and just help educate them, because he was such a baby himself, but it was quite hard to educate him on what was going to happen next. And it was fine. I changed hospitals. I never liked my prenatal care at both of them. I think that's a part that was really missing from mine. The births were great, but prenatal care I wasn't a fan of it, like how they were supporting me and the lack of. And I think I got loud enough by being, when I was like 32 weeks pregnant, that the head of midwifery stepped in and really supported me, and she was fantastic at the trust I was at. And from then on, that's where we decided a home birth was right. And because I'm 10 minutes from the hospital, I actually gave birth here the second time round. We had these things called LTNs put in, which made the midwife 5 minutes late. So I actually gave birth on my own. My husband was there. He put our kids to bed and slept through it. And it was a great birth. And they arrived, we got everything sorted. He started feeding on me. I had a graze just a bit too close to my urethra, and it was a graze. It wasn't even a grade 1, but it was too close to my urethra that she didn't want to stitch it at home. And it was strictly was on. She knew that was very important to me, and I was invested in Bill Bailey winning that year. And she was like, "Look, we'll get you to the hospital. We'll get it done. I'll make sure that you get seen very quickly, and you'll be home time for Strictly, so we don't ruin this whole experience that you've had with your birth. Like, I know that's very important to you," which was lovely. The ambulance guys arrived really quickly. Got to the hospital, and I started to say, he doesn't look right. His colour doesn't look right. And they're like, it's fine, it's just cold. And I was like, no, something isn't right. And we were in the lift, and I was in a wheelchair, just the rules that they want you to stay in a wheelchair. And I was like, no, he doesn't look right. And then I literally, we're getting out the lift off the labour wards. I was like, no, literally, he's not right. He got picked up by one of the other midwives, who started shaking his foot. Next thing I know, a doctor arrived, just took him away, ran off with him, and the alarm started going off, and the team started all piling in. Basically, he suffered what's called a sudden unexpected postnatal collapse. I have met randomly you meet a few people in our community this has happened to. All of them had completely different births to me. So this is where I'm going to get on the defense, because people like to blame the home birth who aren't educated and don't think I did all my research about home births. And I met a woman who had been watched in pregnancy because of diabetes and stuff like that, and she blamed herself for a croissant she ate this sudden unexpected collapse. And she had a different birth to me with epidural. I've met people who've had C-sections, and this has happened. We were just in my home birth saved him, because we ended up in the right spot at the right time. If I'd been at the hospital I had my last son, where the midwife-led unit is on the basement and the labour ward is on the 6th floor and there's a lift, he wouldn't survive or be severely brain damaged. So what happened that night, the stars just aligned with right place, right time. But yeah, what happened was he had bleeding on the lungs. He had to be resuscitated several times. And then he suffered what's called an HIE. That is the longer word for that I can't say, but basically lack of oxygen to the brain. So they had to cool him. And then they had to decide what happened to him. And we basically got told, we once I got sorted out, went to a room, and it was just the look of pity of like, we don't think he's gonna make it. And we're in London. They had calls with Chelsea and Westminster. They all clubbed together to be like, what do we do with this baby? And they chose to send him to Homerton Hospital, which is a level 3 NICU. And so he got sent there, and we stayed at our hospital overnight because I thought they'd look after us, which they did. And he was in the NICU over there, and we just got told he's very, very sick. We don't know what's going to happen to him. And he was, bless him, on the unit with all these little 23-week-old babies. He was this massive 40-weeker that was not moving as well, floppy, just on his machines, and these little 23-weekers with their tiny hands moving next to him. And but from there he just started getting better. Better and better, and 2 weeks later, Christmas Eve, he went back to North Mid, which is our local hospital, and then on New Year's Eve he came home.
Yay!
But it's been a journey from there, because he had a brain scan at 3 weeks old, and there was marks on the brain, and they were like, well, we didn't get the full communication on what that means. They did say it could cause delays, but what I realized, because we would keep going for appointments, was that they were looking for signs of cerebral palsy, and that's what HIE can lead to. And cerebral palsy, like everything, is a spectrum. So obviously I think we knew obviously there was no huge marks on the brain, so it wasn't going to be on the further end of the spectrum, but what that spectrum looked like for him. But we are almost at the cusp of just finally being discharged from everything, and they're considering, he's 3 now and at preschool of school and due to start reception next year, and they're considering all of this to be an event that happened in his life but not have impacted him medically or developmentally. So that has been my journey, is that I have also gone on a journey to learn about birth trauma, because they talk about birth trauma, and it's very hard when you don't feel you're fit. The act of giving birth for me wasn't traumatic, because I went when I had mastitis not long after he came home, and had to go to the doctors, and she was like, oh, giving birth at home, like, on your own without a midwife, that could be seen as quite traumatic. And I was like, no. Like, no, I mean, I think after everything I went through, I was like, that's not the traumatic bit of love. Even if I hadn't have gone through all of that, just because, it is how I had someone else who did end up giving birth in a car. Actually, I know several people who've given birth on their own. It's quite interesting how many people you start to know. And she really took a lot of blame for giving birth in the car, and she must have found that as traumatic. But and that's what we find about trauma. But it's been a huge recovery journey we had to go on, because we did suffer. I had PTSD, and it didn't get discovered until a long time after. And I could, because I'm someone who wear red lipstick, put my face on, I run a business, I will do everything to try and make it look like I'm coping. And if you're highly functioning and getting on with life, but there was a lot of damage being done to my relationships and to myself in that process. But found a fantastic EMDR therapist, and I spent a year doing that of 2023. And just to reassure anyone, that was, my child was 2 when I started EMDR. So 2 years later.
It can be that thing as well, that because you're going through it as well, you don't necessarily recognize how much you are going through, or how much you have changed, or how much your moods are changing and things like, because you are, especially with PTSD, I mean, I've been through PTSD a couple of times for various different reasons, and it's that feeling of you're not actually in your own body.
And your body's very angry. You've got a very angry body because you're in flight. What I was in, me and my husband will talk about it together, because we also were both in it, but had 2 very different experiences, and that's what it shows you. But he agrees that I went into flight zone. He was like, you just kept saying, give me my baby back. I went into this isn't happening. giving back right now, and for your body to go to that zone. Or even like, I think 2 months after I gave birth, I remember one time being sat on the sofa at home, like I think I was just feeding him, and I said, I don't feel anything. I was like, I don't feel sad, I don't feel unhappy, I don't feel anything. And I was like, that, and now me looking back on that, I'm like, that is not okay for a human being 2 months after this feeding their baby to not feel anything.
We describe that. We have this thing at our house, we call it the walking through treacle. So it's those days where and we have grades of it as well, so it's like, where are you on your treacle scale today? Like,
that's a good scale.
because it can slow you down, it can dampen everything. If you are literally swimming in treacle, you can't feel, everything is completely dampened. It's almost like you can't even hear sometimes properly, and you're not processing anything and everything. Or sometimes it's like, there might be a little bit of treacle on the floor, but it's not really stopping me, kind of thing. So it's, as you said, it can affect everybody in different ways, and there's different things that you look at. But if you're not feeling anything, that in itself is a feeling. It's a numbness. It is that, like you said, fight or flight, and where you are in that journey, and where you are in that thing. But when you are physically feeling it, when you are there, if you feel numb, because you go, oh well, I'm clearly not depressed, you don't do anything about it.
Oh, and I got told, even like everyone would tell me, and my friend who's a midwife would tell me, oh, if you've got PTSD, it will represent 12 weeks after. And I was so at 12 weeks, and I'm a big checklister. Like, tick, oh, I'm fine. Oh, tick, I'm not having traumatic flashbacks. I'm fine. And then I read into it deeper, because I'm like, hold on. I was breastfeeding a baby. I had all these hormones in me from birth. Also, we were in lockdown. I had a 2-year-old as well who I needed to try and rebuild a relationship with. And a business aside from that. So I was like, PTSD, like I've read now for women, like everything else with mental health, can take 4 years to show up. And that's not even addressing if you're a woman who's been through the birth hormones process, or I don't know, menopause later in life. And I remember as well, I was thinking about what happens every single day, living it every single day in some form, living what happened on that day. And then, but because I was in COVID as well, I had no one coming round to sit and be like, should we talk about it? No one. And then when the world opened up 6 months later, it was a bit like, Caroline's had enough of this tension, like let's move on. And I'd be like, I felt I couldn't talk, and that was the time where I was ready to talk. And that's what I also learned, was that the first sign of the first part of healing from trauma is talking about it. And I was hugely delayed in that, kind of thing. And also because everyone's quite English. And you don't want to be like, oh, I don't want to mention it to her because it might remind her of what happened. It's like, I'm living it every day. It's probably best to verbalize it rather than think about it. I
mean, one of the things that I'm big on, I've just finished, or I've actually listened to it twice, about the birth debrief. I'm a big advocate of everybody having a birth debrief, whether your birth was amazing, traumatic, anything in between. Whenever you're ready to chat about it, whether that then be a chat about celebrating it, or a chat about things that might not have quite gone right, and just going through stuff, so that if there is anything going on, you can pick up on it pretty early on. And if there's something did go wrong, being able to say, like, I mean, for me, obviously I've had 3 births. I can't sit here and go through minute by minute, play by play of every single thing that happened in all 3 of those births. You remember certain bits, you don't remember everything. Some of them get a little bit sloshed out. Sometimes your timeline can go a bit weird. And that's not just because that's how your brain works, but also, I mean, like, especially if you're in pain, when you're in that, you don't remember the timeline anyway. Time has no meaning at all. Something that could take 3 hours felt like 20 minutes and things like that. So being able to have someone who was either there or who witnessed it, or maybe had your birth notes or something like that, to be able to then say, right, well, I remember this happening, but I don't remember why, or being told about it, or blah, 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 blah. And someone who could sit there and say, right, well, you were given oxytocin because it had slowed down. We explained this to you and you agreed, and then that's what we set off, and that this caused that, blah, 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 blah. Being able to have someone to go through the events with you, and then if that brings up something, like you say, you didn't know you were suffering from PTSD, but if someone had sat down with you and said, what's going on for you, where we are, how are you feeling, they could have gone, you need more help.
Well, I know exactly, and I think that was it, because we were let down on, we did have a birth debrief. You get one automatically at the hospital with the event we had, but it was terrible. And because I've seen private birth debriefs, I think would have been a great route.
Yeah.
But I thought we were going to get someone there from when that happened. And firstly, I had to fight for my husband to come, because it was still COVID, and I had to be like, this, we're talking an event that happened to him too.
Yeah,
he needs to come.
Yeah.
And then there was 2 women that walked in, and I was a bit like, look, I do want to talk about why I was on my own and why this happened. And it was just so dismissed. And I actually ended up having a debrief in my therapy session of the debrief.
Yeah.
But it was that as well, because what I say, what was bad is bad, they weren't listening to me. Because then when I got listened to, the first therapist, basically, when I got listened to by, it was the physio that picked up, my son's physio, who looked at us holistically, wonderful woman, and was like, this shouldn't have happened. I'm going to get you some temporary NHS support, even though you're outside. I was outside the time zone of getting support. It was 18 months later, but they did it because they knew I needed it. And the first time I told her my story, she cried.
Yeah.
The therapist cried about my story, about what happened in depth, and it shows the debrief, they weren't listening to me. They were so unemotional about it and just had to do it.
Yeah.
And I think
that's the thing as well. If you're going to have a debrief, yes, have the one that they offer you, but like you said, you do need something that's more personal, because I'm not one for knocking things, but if you go into that debrief and it's led by someone who wasn't even there, who've only written it, they're only there to tick the boxes so that they're not going to get sued.
Yeah, but that was basically what I think realized would happen. I'm like, why isn't my midwife here? She said she was invested in us. I felt really lost. And I think also, because what happens when you have an HIE, it's treated the same as if a mother dies or a baby dies. And if a baby has to be cooled, which is what happens, you have to have an investigation by an external provider, HSIB. So we'd already gone through the whole investigation, which is traumatic in itself. And they were excellent. The people that led the investigation were like amazing. I can't fault them. And we made sure they thanked me for my, were very, and went through the report with me. But the report is so heavy that every time I've looked back on it at a different stage of my journey, new things come up, and it's actually worse.
Yeah. There's something to go about. Yeah.
It's actually like, I thought he was being resuscitated for 10 minutes, and it actually was 20 minutes. And then I was like, oh, like, and this happened 45 minutes later where he collapsed again. I was like, it's because you have more time to read it as you're recovering yourself. You have more time to read it. I'm sure if I haven't read it in like 2 years, but I'm sure if I read it again, there'd be more stuff that come up. But that was it. I felt like I was at this debrief to check a box for them, and it had nothing to do with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to go through, like, obviously your experience of that report and things as well, from other people that I've spoken to who've had similar things, who've had reported, and obviously I spoke to someone who did have a loss, but she was in Australia, and obviously their setup is very different as well, and different things happen. But you've got that thing of, you've got this document, and like you said, it's heavy and it's quite thick. They've gone into everything in minute detail, because actually they have to, because at the core of that is neither you or your child. It is because they don't want to be sued. And you've got to look at that document and think, well, it's all in there in minute for minute, blow for blow documentation. You've then got to make that decision around, do I actually want to read that? Or is the information of, like you said, I knew he'd been resuscitated. Do I need to know how many minutes he was being resuscitated for? Will that make a difference? And if that difference is negative, do I still need to know? And that's why I always say, like, having that extra support, having someone else to talk to, having a therapist, having someone who's actually invested in you, not in the place where the incident happened.
And you are so right, because actually, so I think the detail of the event was important for me to firstly, I think the people that at the stage of life didn't want to believe it was that bad.
Yeah.
And not everyone, like there were people who were like, you know, in it and were like, you've been through the biggest thing that any of our friends have been through, like kind of thing, you know, really validating it. And then there were others who were like, yeah, but he's fine now. And so, you know, so for me, I need to be like, no, like it's fucking this shit, and I can tell you that. Sorry, can I swear?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you're absolutely right as well, though, on the other details. So things they go into detail with was, for example, that the process of transferring a newborn from the house to, and the monitoring of it, and that's where I like, do I need to know this? And the self-blame, then you're like, oh, was that my fault of how I hold him in the ambulance, despite the fact this is not my first baby.
Absolutely.
And I think that was also a saving grace that it was my second child, because I've kept the first one alive and healthy. I think
you've kept the second one alive and healthy.
I have, despite that all. But in the initial stage, it is that whole, I think I would have been a lot harder for myself, that where the benefit of being a second time mum, and also just having to be stronger for the first one, and not necessarily a good thing, but yeah. And you're right, you do, and that's why they were really good. I have to say the HSIB were really good to mitigate, just be like, we want you to know we flagged this as a risk, but it's not as a risk to you. We're saying that maybe this needs to be looked at as a process in the ambulance service, you know, like, you know, and
absolutely. I mean, just sort of like as a very vague kind of thing to that, when I was transferred in for my first birth, I remember the ambulance crew, one of them saying, thank God you've got a midwife here, because I wouldn't have known what to do. Now, if something had happened, I mean, I was just being transferred in, there wasn't a major issue, but if something had happened to me, that would have been, well, why does that staff not know what to do? Surely they should have had some sort of training around everything that they would need to do in every situation that they might come across as being ambulance staff. There are lots of people giving birth at any one point. Why does that ambulance staff not know what to do in an emergency situation while someone's giving birth? And if something like, say, if there was then an inquest or a report or something like that done, I would hope, and I'm hoping, that would then flag it up and then go, right, all of our staff need extra training to deal with the situation.
The red flag for me is it's a female problem, and we know what, you know.
Don't get me started on that.
Yeah, but you know, and I think we talk about this now, and I think it's great to talk about it, you know, talk about the health gap, pension gap, all these gaps. It's when there's female issues, the care hasn't been centered around it. And even my husband will agree with me on this, is like when we talk about, you know, how in finance they would overcomplicate things to keep the wealth. It'd be a bit like, you don't need to know this. And I feel like when birth became medicalized, it's like, you don't need to know this, just be a good girl and get on with it. And it's like, we do need to know this, it's our bodies. And so do you then, if you're going to be in front, which you likely are in an ambulance, you're going to be in front of a pregnant giving birth woman at some point. You don't know what's going to happen. But no, I think it's really important to talk about these stories, just so then it doesn't get to this point and people understand. If you have a friend, a family member going through it, don't ask them why it happened. Don't, you know, start kind of implying it wasn't a big deal, or saying they're fine now, though, because the chances are you don't know what their care is like. You know, ask about follow-up appointments, things like that. You know, ask about them, but more importantly, be like, what can I do to help you? And it might be 6 months later, a year later, and you're bored of it, but trust me, they're starting to process it at that point themselves.
I think the worst one as well is, what are you whinging about? The baby's alive and well. And it's like, that should literally be your very bottom baseline. That is not even. And then even if baby is alive and well and all the rest of it, who's to say mum's well?
And we know what's key. They talk so much about the early years and how important they are, and how can we give them the best early years if a mother isn't being looked after. I don't get it. I really don't. And I was so lucky that we had this great physio. It was 18 months later, and I think my timeline, it all was when it was ready, because it was delayed with COVID, and I think I wouldn't have been ready about to talk it earlier. The doctor did give me CBT, a whole host of reasons. I know some people like CBT. I think it's terrible. They give you homework. They give you homework. I was 4 months postpartum, had a 2-year-old in a lockdown, and they were giving me homework. And when you're a highly functioning woman like me, I'm like, tick, I've done the homework. My brain is wonderful.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, I know, like I said, I do know the people who have had it, who love it. To be honest, my partner, years and years ago, he's had CBT, loves it, thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. I've had it a couple of times, and I've since found out that because I have ADHD, it is like, it's a tick box in the exercise. Look, I've got the answer right. I know how my brain works. Doesn't mean I can control it.
Yeah. No, and it was too soon to process any trauma. And then also there's some school of thoughts, which I found out from someone who trained to be a doula, that like, oh, give them one opportunity to talk about it and then move on. And I think it was the school of thought in this CBT session. So it meant I talked about everything but what had happened to me, and but the reason I was there. And it kind of just make me feel, I think I'm just so grateful that also my husband worked in a big company that had Bupa, so I got to get the private EMDR, because I would have been outside of that. They are starting to see EMDR as a really good thing for women with birth trauma, and it is. I love the EMDR. But you had to be 18 months in it, and I'm like, oh, what person recommends? Like, I think you're in the thick of learning how to be a mother at that stage. There's so many women who don't realize till they're out of it, and then they're the ones that start scaremongering other people. Not all of them, but some of them, as their way of coping. And just moving on. And I think that you can move on, but you have to do the processing first. I think, and I feel like I'm starting to be evidence of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we've kind of come to a natural end there.
We have.
That seems amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us, because obviously it's a tough subject to talk about, but you've done it with such elegance and poise. It's come across amazingly. So thank you so much.
That's very kind. Thank you. No, thank you for spreading all birth stories, positive and ones that don't work out the way you planned, and let's hope we can get more help from others. I think that's the ultimate goal, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode, and especially big thank you to Caroline for sharing her inspiring and heartfelt stories. If you'd like to connect with Caroline or learn more about her, you'll find all her details in the show notes below. Next week, we'll wrap up the year with a very special Christmas episode. I'll be reflecting on some of my own birthing experiences and sharing the personal journey that led me to start this podcast. It's going to be a really meaningful way to close out the year, so I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care, and remember, your journey is powerful and your story matters. See you next time on the Mother Gaia Birthy Pod.